Hi everyone, my name is Westra, and today I'll be presenting my honors presentation. The title of this presentation is The Impact of Acute Dynamic and Static Stretching on Athletic Performance of NCAA Division III Alma College Swimmers. And I was advised by Dr. Montoya on this project from the IPHS department. So I think my study is significant because the amount or the increase in swimmers that compete year-round has increased by 21% since the year 2008, so since kind of like the Michael Phelps era started. Additionally, stretching has been used to prepare for warm-up, or is prepared for warm-up as a part of warm-up prior to competition and practice by lots and lots of swimmers. There are also a lot of swimming publications like Swimming World, US Masters Swimming, groups like that recommend a variety of swim-specific stretches, but they really don't have any quantitative data to support that. Additionally, stretching is inexpensive and it's accessible, and really anyone of any age can do it. So dynamic stretching has been seen to increase the muscle and body temperature, and this can result in increased post-activation potentiation, which increases the rate of cross-bridge cycling. And when you increase the rate of cross-bridge cycling, force production can be improved. Static stretching, on the other hand, has been seen to decrease tendon and aponeurosis stiffness. So there has been a good amount of research done on stretching. So for static stretching, researchers have seen a decrease in muscle stiffness and resistance, which in effect would improve performance. For dynamic stretching, in isolated cases they found, such as with the knee extensors and different muscles like that it can increase power in athletes. And then if this is done at too high of a duration or intensity, it can be have a negative impact and kind of like decrease that force. Additionally, dynamic stretching, where you're moving around, simulates kind of the subsequent exercises, so that can also prepare athletes for whatever they're going to do. And there has been some speculation as to what sports what sports benefit most from static stretching and which benefit most from dynamic, but swimming really hasn't been identified on any of those studies. There was a study done with sub-elite swimmers where they looked at static stretching, dynamic stretching, just in the water warm-up and no warm-up at all on performance in the 50-meter freestyle and breaststroke. And they found that low intensity in the water warm-up was preferred, as well as that static stretching really didn't have a difference compared to just like the control of no stretch. And that was a Kafkas et al. Study that was done in Turkey in 2019. So I'll be addressing a few research gaps in this study. First, D3 athletes, men and women, haven't really been included in this section of research, and that's what I'll be looking at in this study. Additionally, not a lot of studies include both types of stretching on the same subjects, so that's unique about this study. And additionally, swimmers have only been tested at a 50-meter race length, and for my study, I'll be doing 100 yards, which is more applicable to college swimmers. So the purpose of my study is to determine if acute static or acute dynamic stretching improves athletic performance in Alma College swimmers. So my first aim is to determine what stretching protocol results in the lowest average 100 freestyle time, or generally the best performance. And I think that static stretching will result in swimmers performing better. My second aim is to determine if there is a difference in rate of fatigue when athletes do either static or dynamic stretching. And I think that static stretching will result in slower fatigue rates, where dynamic stretching will result in the swimmers being more fatigued more quickly. And then my third aim is just looking at 1/100, which will be the peak, so the fastest, lowest time of completing the 100-yard freestyle. And I think that dynamic stretching will result in the greatest peak performance. So my study is randomized and counterbalanced to avoid any learning effects or any order effects. And I'll be looking at dynamic stretching, static stretching, or no stretching. And then my dependent variables will be sports performance in seconds and the rate of fatigue, which will also be in seconds. And as I mentioned, my subjects are members of the Alma College swim and dive team. I had 5 men and 10 women perform in this study. So as you can see here, this is my kind of demographic information. So I recorded their age, height, weight, and then I also wanted to take note of how many years they'd been swimming and at Alma College, and then just like in general. And I thought it was kind of interesting how the women have 11 and a half years on average, and the boys have 8 and a half. I also asked them to record their fastest 100 freestyle time ever. That way we could kind of compare that to how they do in the study to see if they're really at their max effort or not. So my materials that I used was a pre-test survey of demographic information and a swimming background form where I could kind of gather that information about the individuals, the swimmers. And then I used an analog scale that they could subjectively rate their soreness, how they were feeling in general, and stress level. Additionally, I used some of the exercise mats that are in the pool, and they were able to do their stretching protocols on those, just to make it a little bit safer than them being on a wet pool deck. I also used a standard stopwatch to time the swimmers from the start of their race to the end. And then we used the Alma College pool, which is 25 yards, and we used the same lane lines and the same diving blocks. So prior to the testing, the subjects were scheduled for 3 sessions, at least 2 days apart, at a consistent time of day, so either around noontime, early afternoon, or evening. I asked the subjects to maintain their similar sleep, exercise, and diet to avoid any kind of external influences. And then when the subjects showed up at the pool, they completed the swimming background survey, the demographic survey, and then every time they came in, they used the analog scale, rating their fatigue, soreness, and well-being. So then once they all completed those types of things, they started at the same time in the water swimming warm-up. So they started with 400 yards swimming freestyle, which is kind of the basic stroke, and then 300 yards kick, where they used a kickboard, and if they streamlined or did anything else, they just kept it consistent for each time. They also did a 200-yard pull, which is where you take a pull buoy, it's like a piece of foam, and you put it between your legs and you don't kick and just use your arms. So they did that, and then they did 2 12.5-yard sprint off the block, and that was to make sure that they were at their fast race pace tempo, and also they could adjust the blocks to where they would feel most comfortable. So prior to them even coming into the pool, I sent out this really embarrassing video of me demonstrating all of the routines. So I'm doing dynamic stretch or static stretching, dynamic, and then I also had kind of the names of the exercises and how long they had to kind of hold those, just so they had an idea of what they were doing before they came into lab or into the pool. So I used the same protocol for all of these stretching routines, and it was a Macmillan 2006 study. So for the dynamic stretching exercises, or stretching, they did this whole list, and they did 10 repetitions per exercise. And things that had right side and the left side, they did each of those for 10 repetitions. Then this was the static stretching protocol, which was randomly assigned, and they were used, and it was from the same Macmillan 2006 study, and they did each exercise or each stretch 1 time through, and held it for 20 seconds approximately. And then the control was no stretching, so they sat on one of those mats quietly for 8 minutes, and because I used a peer-reviewed study, I was confident that the timing, that those other 2 stretching routines would take the equal 8 minutes. So then we began testing at the pool, in the water. So they went right from those stretching routines to the pool. And they did 3 100-yard freestyle sprints at max effort on a 4-minute interval. They were timed from a dive. So I used the standard swimmer step up, take your mark, go. kind of like format, and then they did that, and in between each one, they did a passive recovery, so they stayed in the pool when they were done, and then a minute before it was time to go again, they were able to get out of the pool, fix their goggles, get some water, and do that kind of stuff. So there wasn't any like stretching or any additional movement between repetitions. And then after each session, they did a 200-yard freestyle cool down, which is pretty standard for swimmers to cool down after sprinting. And I did that to avoid any fatigue or any soreness in the next session. So as I mentioned, my aims are to compare the average 100 freestyle time, the rate of fatigue, as well as the peak performance. And I used a repeated measures of ANOVA statistical analysis, and that will be conducted for our results. So after I analyzed all the data and all the times, I looked at my first aim, which was looking at the average 100-yard freestyle times. So on the x-axis, we have all the protocols, all the stretching routines, and this bar is the control, the second bar is the dynamic stretching, and the third is the static. And then on the y-axis, we have the time in seconds. So the lower the bar, the less time it took and the faster the swimmers went. And then I have the error lines in there to show the standard deviation for that. So we did find a statistically significant result comparing the control and the dynamic groups. The p-value was exactly 0.05 when we compared the average time between the control and the dynamic routine. So dynamic stretching was actually detrimental to the average performance, which is why they have a faster average time compared to the control group. So in this case, it was more advantageous to just sit there rather than do the dynamic stretching routine. So next we looked at rate of fatigue, and we did not find any statistical significance in this at all. Again, we have the control, dynamic, and static bars on the bottom, and then the time in seconds. So the rate of fatigue was the difference between the third and the first 100, so we could see how much they slowed down during that time. So you can see here we have pretty big standard deviations, so there was a real variety in how quickly the subjects were fatiguing. And then for this third chart, we looked at the peak 100 freestyle time. So we took their fastest time for each of those protocols. And again, we have control, dynamic, and static, and their time along here. And there was no statistical significance between their peak or fastest 100 freestyle time. So really there was, the addition of stretching in either form really was not advantageous or not. It kind of just stayed the same. So as I mentioned, both forms of stretching did not improve peak performance, average performance, or the rate of fatigue. And average performance was actually better after not stretching than engaging in dynamic stretching. Additionally, I just kind of overall just like saw that stretching does not improve athletic performance in the 3/100s freestyle. There's no additional benefit to doing so. Dynamic stretching leads to muscular fatigue, which I think could be an explanation for why we didn't see any benefit with that routine. And then also static stretching may not have decreased the stiffness or increased the range of motion any more than the in the water warm-up did, and did not provide any additional benefit to the swimmers. So it's important to kind of mention the limitations of this study. Since these were out-of-season athletes, the motivation difference might have caused some influence in my results. It's not quite the same as being at a competition or being in a race to kind of be at your max speed and effort the whole time. Additionally, there's a variety in training backgrounds on the swim team, and all of the subjects used like the same event. So distance swimmers and sprinters were both doing the 3/100s. And this study can also only be generalized to swimmers specifically, not basketball players, soccer players, or like gymnasts. The strengths of my paper are that the protocols were already from a peer-reviewed publication, so I feel fairly confident that they did what we were needing them to do, and we also had comparable timing, so each of those stretching routines and the control were all in equal time. And then additionally, the consistency and activity between repetitions, there wasn't any cooling down or extra movement, so we really were able to see how the swimmers responded to these stretching protocols. And then finally, subjects did not have any excessive fatigue or soreness between trials when they filled out those state of being scales. There were no trends or anything like that to say that they were more or less fatigued or sore in comparison with the other days that they came to the pool. So in future studies, I'd like to continue to find scientifically supported ways to enhance swimming performance. That's not something that, there's a lot of scientific backing for, so I think that would be super interesting to continue to look at. Additionally, I'd like to focus on specific events and training. So again, looking at maybe how specific distance swimmers respond to stretching compared to sprinters. Since swimming does have so many different events and different strokes, I think that would be definitely something interesting to look into. Additionally, I think it'd be great to look at in-season athletes when they're at their peak, physical and mental shape. And I would be interested to see how those, how in-season athletes perform with this protocol. So thank you all for listening to my presentation on the effects of acute static and dynamic stretching on swim performance. And I am looking forward to hearing your questions on Honors Day. Thank you.